Okay, so thank you so much for coming to our workshop today. This is part one of two workshops that the English team are going to be running. In this one, we're going to focus on phonics. So if I just introduce myself and the team. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Leslie Brown. I am a reception teacher and I'm also the head of the lower school English team. I'm joined today by Lucy Lewis, who teaches in year one, and Mark Gray, who teaches in year three. They are responsible for our phonics here at Harrow. We also have Gemma McCarran and Kathy Larkins, who are also members of the team as well. If at any point you see us at school and you'd like to ask us about anything English related, we are all very happy to talk to you about anything to do with English. So please do approach us. And if you do have any questions, my email address is there. You're very welcome to email and ask me any questions you like. So the aim of our session today is we just want to give you, enable you really to know how to better support your children with the learning of phonics at home. And we're going to share with you some information regarding on how we teach phonics at Harrow, including some of the terminology which you may have heard us use during online sessions. But just to give you a little bit more information, we would really love it if you chatted with us during this session. So chat is enabled. If at any point you would like us to explain something a little bit more, or you've got a specific question, please put it in the chat and we can either answer it there and then, or we can answer it at the end. We are recording this session and we will be sending you the slides as well. So you will have it to take away. And if you've got any questions afterwards, please do let us know. Okay, so what is phonics? So phonics is, the research tells us that in order to get children reading and spelling, we need to teach phonics in a systematic and explicit approach. Phonics is the teaching of the sounds, and we need to teach it in a specific order. And we call this synthetic phonics. It's a way of teaching reading. The evidence is really clear that teaching systematic synthetic phonics is the most effective way of teaching young children to read, particularly those children who have problems with reading. So it's a very important skill. I'm going to hand over to Lucy and Mark, who are going to lead the rest of the presentation. As I've said before, please do chat with us. We'd love to find out some more. So I'll first of all pass over to Lucy.
Okay, thank you so much for coming today. So I want to tell you just how at Harrow Bangkok we teach phonics. So we use phonics as a way of teaching the children to read as quickly as possible and with all the skills that they're going to need for accessing reading in the future. So they're taught to read by breaking down words into separate sounds. We call these sounds phonemes. That's where phonics comes from. They're then taught how to blend these sounds together so that they can read the whole word. In order to have an established reader, it's really important that we have these 5 key elements in place. Phonemic awareness is first. That is the ability to hear, to focus on, to change sounds in any spoken word. So, for example, a child with really good phonemic awareness will be able to tell you which sound to change in the word cat to make it into cot. Second to that, we've got to have our phonics in place. Phonics is the ability to crack the reading and the spelling code. We have to use the child's knowledge of the sounds to lift those words off the page and make reading happen. Following our phonics, once we're confident with that phonemic awareness and our phonic knowledge, that's when we develop fluency. This is the automatic word recognition, where children are so familiar now with sounds and words and blending that they start to recognize words automatically. And this sort of gives them, it frees up their headspace, lightens the cognitive load so that they can start to focus on comprehension. Finally, we have vocabulary and comprehension. Now, once we have that bank of vocabulary, reading and writing opens up for us. Vocabulary is an unconstrained skill, which means that there is no limit on how many words a person can learn or when they stop learning. So whether you are 5 or 35, you can still develop your vocabulary. And comprehension, of course, is taking meaning from a text. So today, our main focus is about phonemic awareness and phonics. So phonics at a glance starts with that knowledge of the alphabetic code. I'm not saying just alphabet. It's not just knowing the alphabet, but it's actually being taught to read letters or groups of letters by saying the sounds that they represent. So for example, they might know the letter M, but they need to know that it makes the sound mm. They might know the letter A, but they need to know that it makes a sound A or B or K, and so on. So there's a code to understanding the sounds that the alphabet make. In addition to this, we have to add in segmenting and blending. So it means the children are taught to make the sounds in the words, and they make them rapidly so that they blend together to make a word. And basically, that's how phonics works. So when teaching or practicing synthetic phonics, it's really, really important to say the sounds correctly. Now, this is something that when we're doing teacher training or parent training, this is the most important thing. You must not add an at the end of a sound. Now, this happens more probably with parents in England, because most of them, when they were taught to read, they didn't use phonics. And so a lot of parents might say m or b or d whenever they're pronouncing the letter. It's really important that they become d, o, and so on. So we can't add that sound on the end. It makes it so much easier when children start to blend the sounds together to make the words. So I have a lovely little example for you here of a little girl making all those nice clear sounds for you that I hope you enjoy.
A, E, D, G, O, K, A, R, B, O, J, W, X, Y, Z, Z.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take over from Ms. Lewis for the next few slides. And following on from talking about the pronunciation, it is important to recognise the fact that many of our children in our school community are non-native English speakers, and so they can encounter many difficulties or challenges when trying to learn English in this case. So we thought it would be quite good just for the next couple of minutes just to talk about some of the challenges that children, non-native children, can find when trying to learn English. So, for example, we talked about tones, and obviously Thai is a tonal language. I'm not an expert at Thai, I can speak some Thai, but I know some knowledge of this, and English is a non-tonal language. So that's one quite big difference between the two languages. It uses intonation rather than tones to show differences in opinion, expression, emotion, for example. So intonation is where we change the pitch of our voice, and this shows different meanings by showing the individual's different feelings, or it might show even different words. So here are some examples of where we change the intonation. The first word is permit, and I stress the syllable per, and this is the noun version of the word, whereas the second word we can see is permit. So there's more emphasis on the second syllable of mit, and this is the verb version of the word. And you can see the little picture clue there gives you the definitions of the two types of word, the noun and the verb. There are other examples. I know Thai friends of mine have often said they found these two quite difficult to pronounce correctly, of desert, as in sand, and dessert, that we eat after our dinner, for example. And there's lots of those difficulties that can be faced in the English language. Also, in English, we use expression to change the meaning or feelings behind a sentence. So, for example, we might emphasize certain words for effect. These two sentences are written the same, but we might emphasize the first word of what are you doing? Rather than in the second, it might be more what are you doing? And so you can hear the change of intonation there in between the two sentences, but has different meanings, such as what are you doing, as in asking exactly what the activity is, or what are you doing, focusing on the person. And I know that many Thai friends of mine, and also my own experience of working in Thai schools for a number of years, there's certain sounds and that Thai speakers can find very challenging to pronounce. And these are just some examples. So often they can mix up between and the L and R sounds. For example, crash and clash can be very difficult to distinguish, or even lock and rock, mixing up those first sounds. On the second, you can see ch and sh, and the ch, the sh, so chip and ship, or cheap and sheep. It's a very subtle difference to hear between these two words. And this is why it's so important to really get those sounds right. Another example, and t, as in th and t, and also and v, w and v, as Thai does not necessarily have that v sound. And so very often my children, even today in class, were saying word instead of verb. So missing that first sound. Also, vowels can be quite tricky. Understanding the difference between the letter name and the letter sound that it makes, such as the letter name A, the sound it makes is a in the word cat, at, but sometimes maybe getting confused et or ket, for example. Another example of difficulties that can be faced are those ending sounds. I often hear children forgetting to pronounce the ending sounds of certain words, like the example I give you, talked, forgetting the ed at the end, so talk in the past tense. We also use plurals, adding s to make it plurals. I know in Thai, it's used more as a quantifier. They define how many or approximately the number rather than changing the word like we do in English. So remembering to add that s at the end if you want, for example, girls. And even the word Thailand, quite often you'll hear Thailand and forgetting that final D. And so the pronunciation is so important to get those sounds right. And on the next slide, here's some, I apologize in advance. I'm going to try and speak some Thai the best that I can, but also it works both ways for English speakers trying to learn Thai. For example, ngongu, the ngo sound is a very hard one to say. Rorua, I can't even say the r sound. And shoshing, the sort of in between the ch and the sh. And the reason I'm showing these is that it works both ways. We have to train our mouths. We have to exercise the way that we say certain words. I had to change the way I position my mouth in order to get the right sound, the best that I can. But it's just interesting to look at both ways in this case. The mouth movements can be different. And even trying to understand, such as the word cow has 5 different tones, 5 different words, can be tricky. So it's also tricky for children to think about a language that they learn that's tonal and seeing the differences. So just moving on, some vocabulary that you'll probably have heard us use in our teaching when on Zoom, or you're going to hear throughout this presentation. So these are some of the words. So vowels and consonants, I've already mentioned. Phoneme and grapheme, Miss Lewis has already talked about. And we also have blending, segmenting, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And digraph, split digraph, and trigraph, which we're also going to talk about a little bit later on as well. But these are some of the very important words that our children need to know. And we're going to cover some of the definitions of these words throughout this session. So letters in English are either split into vowels or consonants. And so the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes the letter Y can be both a consonant or a vowel, such as the word Y, it's being used as a vowel in this case. So the speech sounds made in your mouth and open your tongue in the middle of the mouth, not touching your lips. These are the sounds that we make. It's a more open sound that we make for a vowel sound. The rest of the letters in the English alphabet are consonants. And these are speech where the airflow is restricted in some way. So we're restricting the sound from flowing out of our mouths, not as open in the way that we expect them. And as Miss Lewis showed earlier, the video of the little girl showing the correct pronunciations, it's just really important to get those pronunciations right and practice them with your child. I'll hand over to you, Miss Lewis.
So the English language has 26 letters only, but at least 44 unique sounds. And each of those sounds has lots and lots of different ways to spell them. This is why phonics is tricky. It means that some sounds are made using pairs or groups of letters called digraphs and trigraphs. Don't worry about those too much just yet. We'll come to them. Let me talk to you first about phonemes and graphemes. These are important words to know. It sounds maybe like we're using a lot of jargon. Actually, all the children that we teach phonics to know these words. They know what a phoneme is. They know what a grapheme is because we use these daily. A phoneme is any one of the 44 sounds. So any sound that they make, that's a phoneme. We count these sounds in phonics and we use them to help us. So pause for a moment. Can you tell me how many phonemes you can hear in cat? How many sounds can you hear in cat?
There's lots of,
tell me in the chat.
Yeah, there's lots of children here actually. There's some from my class. If you want to answer, you could turn your camera on and be really brave and see if you could answer.
Oh, that would be brilliant. Who could tell us how many sounds are in cat? Anyone putting it in the chat for us?
Not yet.
No one's brave just yet? Okay. Our sounds in cat are k, at. We've got 3 sounds, okay? And those are the 3 phonemes. K, at. Okay? So we ask the children frequently, how many sounds can you hear? Let's count them. A grapheme is how a phoneme is written down. Think graphic, okay? How do we write it? There can be more than one way to spell a phoneme. Now, this one might be a little bit more tricky. If we've got any year 1s or year 2s, they might try this. And any mummies and daddies or helpers, please have a go. How many ways can you think of to spell the phoneme that sounds like A? A. Would anyone like to pop in the chat? A word perhaps that they think uses the sound A? Oh, we're not willing. Oh, well done. Thank you. We've got an AE. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. How else might we write the sound A? You can give me an example of a word if you like. Okay, let's have a look. Yeah, let's have a look then, shall we? All right. So the phoneme A, the sound A, can be spelled differently in all of these words. It can be AY, as in way. There are 2 sounds in this word, A. We can have the sound A in make, but you can see that the 2 letters that make the sound are actually split up. We'll come to those in a bit. It can be spelled AI, okay, as in fail. EA, as in great. EIGH, as in slay. Okay, and these are just a few examples, and A on its own, as in lady. So there may be lots more, there'll be lots more words, but this is to show you that one sound can be spelt in lots and lots of different ways. And so we teach these in a really careful way to the children. Let's have a look at a few sounds.
A E I O U R O Ow Oi Ear Air U A Ow I E Oi U U O W oo, u, o, e, a, e, I, o, u, r, e, I, o, u, o, e, f, oo, if, s, j, a.
Okay, hopefully you noticed there that there were several sounds that were perhaps written the same way, and the child was pronouncing them differently in different words, or perhaps sounds that sounded the same but were written differently in different words. Hopefully you noticed that. So, how do we begin teaching phonics? Well, first of all, we've got to start with the listening skills. Listening skills is absolutely essential to phonics. So they start really from birth, in toddlers, pre-nursery and nursery. Now, some children might start to learn their letter sounds early on, but most children start their main phonics learning once they start their reception year. Before that, it's all about the listening skills. Of course, we teach phonics from reception all the way through year 1, year 2, and beyond until the child is confident and fluent. Mark is going to tell you a little bit about the program that we use at Harrow.
So at Harrow, we use the program called Letters and Sounds, and this is a phonics program that was issued by the Department for Education in England. And this is the way that we structure the teaching of phonics at Harrow, and many schools internationally as well as in the UK use this structure. It's divided into 6 sections, or phases as we call them, and it's intended to begin at preschool in early years and is meant to finish in year 2, age 7, but there are many schools that still continue to roll it out up into Key Stage 2 as well. This is just a diagram that shows you a breakdown of the different phases 1 to 6, and I just wanted to give you a brief overview of each one, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail after this of each phase. So phase 1 is intended for nursery to reception age, and in this phase, this is divided into 7 aspects that encourage careful listening, and Miss Lewis in a few minutes will explain some of those aspects in more detail. Phase 2 lasts throughout reception approximately 6 weeks, and this is when the first simple sounds are introduced that children start to learn, and they can start to create words by blending those sounds together orally. Phase 3 is also in reception. This lasts 12 weeks approximately, and this is the teaching of long vowel sounds, O, U, R, for example, and 26 more phonemes are introduced. And this is when the children are encouraged to read and spell simple words, but the emphasis is more so on reading. Phase 4 is still in reception, and it lasts approximately 4 to 6 weeks, and no new phonemes are taught. This is where consonant clusters are introduced. So for example, sp, ot becomes more sp, ot, and for example, tr as another example of this, where children start to spot those patterns, those consonant clusters. And we would expect the children need to be confident at blending before this stage is introduced. Phase 5 takes place throughout all of year 1. And this is when lots more new complex sounds and alternative sounds and pronunciations are taught. So for example, the letter Y, you can see 3 examples there of yes, making a Y sound, by, making an I sound, berry, making an E sound. And finally, in phase 6, this occurs throughout year 2 and beyond into Key Stage 2 as well. And this is the learning of spelling patterns. So for example, prefixes and suffixes. And it is important to notice how long the phases, how many phases last throughout reception, that there is so much emphasis throughout the reception years. But also teachers don't rush through the phases. We make sure that the children have a good base knowledge before moving on to the next phase. And phase 1 runs throughout all of the phases. Phases 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The phase 1 activities are designed to run alongside the activities in phases 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so teachers will keep coming back to those. And we're going to now talk a little bit more detail about the phases. Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Okay, so I want to focus for a moment on phase 1. Phase 1, if you like, is the most important phase. Phase 1 begins right at birth, and there are so many things that you as parents and carers can do to support these skills. If the children don't have these skills in place, they might struggle to master the next stage of their phonics learning. So we are so grateful that you are taking the time to come to training like this, to be aware of the stages of learning that your children are going to go through. So we teach attention and listening skills, of course, at Harrow, and they're emphasised all the way through and well into Key Stage 2. Their phonic learning really relies on them being able to hear and distinguish the sounds within words. Children with poor listening or attention skills can really struggle. So if you think about them starting their sounds, their phase 2 sounds in reception, we really need them to have good listening and attention skills in place before they begin. So phase 1, it's so vital. Okay, it has 7 aspects. I'm not going to talk a lot about each one, but I just want to give you some ideas of what you can do with your children to meet these 7 aspects of phase 1. So, environmental sounds, the sounds that you hear all around you every day. So, some ideas of things that you can do with your children at home to develop those phase 1 listening skills. Make some sounds that your children can copy. Now, we do this instinctively when we have babies around us. We goo and we ga and we ba 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 at them all the time. It's almost instinctive. It's how we teach them to talk. And those are things that are so, so important. You can go on a listening walk, walking together and going, what do you hear? Can you hear the trees? Can you hear the birds? Pointing out sounds and encouraging the children to distinguish what they are. Looking at instrumental sounds. Now, it's wonderful that lots of our children start musical instruments early, but actually, when we're talking about instrumental sounds, they can be non-musical instruments as well. Pots and pans, homemade shakers, anything that the children enjoy making a sound with. So playing little games with those sorts of instruments can be really helpful. Hiding something that makes a sound and making the sound maybe behind a box or behind the sofa. What do you think that sound is? And getting the children to determine what the sound is really, really helpful. Body percussion is a lovely thing to do. Lots of head, shoulders, knees and toes. Songs that have actions and clapping and wind the bobbin up, which is a favourite, I know, down in early years. Songs that the children are taught in toddlers, in nursery and in pre-nursery. Take the time to get the children to sing those to you and get to know them and sing them at home as well. They are actually a really, really important part of those developing those listening skills. Using rhythm and rhyme in songs, in poems, those things are really important because they're encouraging the children to start to pick out familiar parts of the words. Okay, so whenever you're listening for rhyme, you're thinking about the parts of the words that make the rhyme. And that's really important. And things like alliteration. I know that since my children have been little, we've automatically put alliteration with their words. So my daughter Polly has been Polly Pickle from she's been born. And I still at 13 call her Polly Pickle. And you know, when we play with babies and we say, oh, tickly tummies, using that alliteration actually really helps the children to start to think about sounds and how they use their voices. The next step of this is oral blending. Now, this is so helpful, particularly once your child is using speech. They're talking to you and you're talking to them, and using oral blending is so helpful to have in place before we start even looking at words written down. You don't use any text. But you start to play games with your children where you say, oh, can you see the bus? And they have to blend it together to know what the code is. Did they hear the bus? Did they see the bus? Can you get your code for me? Where are your shoes? And the children, they love these kind of games where you know, it's like a quiz, it's like a little competition, and you can encourage them to start doing the same with you, with other little brothers and sisters, and so on. And having this skill in place where you're teaching them how to blend the sounds that they hear will help them enormously whenever they come to reading sounds and then blending them, because we get them to read them out loud and hear them and blend. So this kind of practice is brilliant. Okay, I hope you're going to join in with me now this time. Can anyone type in the chat for me some rhymes that you might spot in this picture? Can you spot some pairs of things that rhyme? Can anyone spot any pairs of things that rhyme in this picture?
I think people
Come
might
on,
be
Mr.
shy
K.
today.
Mr. K,
Yeah.
can you spot
There
any?
we go.
Yay, Kieran
Oh,
first.
thank you, Kieran. Frog and dog.
Well
Perfect.
done.
Frog and dog. And these are things that you can play as I Spy when you're out and about. Mr. K, can you think of any?
Oh, where
I
am I
can,
looking?
I can see a boat and a coat.
Oh, yes.
Yes, a boat and a coat. Well,
Oh,
pen and
oh,
hair.
June
Thank
just
you,
picked one.
hair and share.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. And our last one. These two.
Oh,
Is it cook and book?
It's cook and book. Well done. And these little fun games that you can either use pictures for, or you can just use things whenever you're out and about, or things in the room with you. You know, oh look, you know, what rhymes with, and encouraging your children to find rhymes are brilliant. Okay, one more little game. Can you tell me 3 things that start with the sound S? 3 things in this picture that start with S. Oh, snake. Well done. We've
well
got
done,
one.
Alan.
Snake. Have we got another one? S. Oh.
Any more?
Ooh, can anyone see?
Well done, Kieran.
Oh, we've got the
Sausages.
sausages. Well done. Any more? Any more S sounds? What's this? A skirt. Well done. So we've got 3 things there that start with S. And of course we can add to this. Oh, thank you, Eiley. We've got some things that could also begin with H. Seeing as Eiley's writing on my screen, perhaps you could circle something that begins with H, the letter H, or the sound H.
See Eiley there. Come on, Eiley, find it.
Oh, thank you, Anging. Thank you. Well done. Really super. Okay, we've got a house and we've got a horse. Fantastic. Okay, guys, I might need you to clean the screen for me so that I can keep going. Do you know how to do that? Can you clear your screen? Thank you. Well done. Really good. Anging, can you clear your screen? Brilliant. I love it. Really good. Okay. Before we move on, another little game. This is just an example of things that you can use. I Spy is the best example of a game that can be as simple or as tricky as you need. So saying to your child something like, I spy with my little eye, something with beginning with the sound eh, allows them to look at pictures or look around them, look for the word that makes that sound. And when they're more advanced, you can then start looking at words. Okay, like, can you find the snake? Can you find the bone? And getting those to them to read those. So it can be as easy or as complex as you need it to be. Now, using these really encourage your children to think more about initial sounds and alliteration and recognize the individual sounds. Okay, playing games is the best way to have fun with learning to speak English, with learning to read English. Okay, and you can play them anytime. So that's why they really work. Mark, I'll hand over to you for phase 2.
Okay, so I'm just going to briefly explain about phase 2. This is during reception, and it takes up to about 6 weeks to complete. In this phase, this is where the children will learn some letter sounds, and they learn to match them to graphemes. And they're learning these phonemes, they learn them to read and to write simple words, usually CVC words, very short, consonant, vowel, consonant words. Most of the first sounds that they learn are single letter sounds, such as s, at, p, I, but they also learn some digraphs, such as k, l, s, are introduced. 2 letters, 1 sound. And these are the 5 sets of, thank you, Ms. Lewis. These are the 5 sets of sounds that they will learn throughout phase 2. And you can see those for yourself. But as you can see, it starts off as single letter sounds that always start with sat pin and moves on to those digraphs. A digraph you just heard me mention, and we've been talking about these throughout the session. This is where 2 letters make 1 sound. And a consonant digraph is where 2 consonants are next to each other, but they make a single sound, such as CK making the sound K. We also have, you can see some examples of consonant digraphs here, such as sh, k, l. A vowel digraph contains at least 1 vowel, but 2 letters still make the single sound. So for example, A, E, R, oi. And here are some more examples of consonant digraphs that you can see, such as s, z. And there's lots of words we've got here that you can see use these consonant digraphs. So if, as an example. And the next row you can see ch, and so we can see, for example, if, ship. And the final set here are k, and we can see, for example, ch, if, and k. So you can see the digraphs highlighted in red in these words. So this is the example of phase 2. During this phase, children also begin to blend the sounds to make words. And by the end of phase 2, we would expect children to be able to read and spell some vowel consonant words and consonant vowel consonant words, or CVC words as we call them. And you can see some examples of vowel consonant and CVC consonant vowel consonant words there in gold. During this phase, children also will learn to read some of the tricky words, and these are words that cannot be read phonetically. So for example, the, to, go, I, know. And throughout the phases, more tricky words are introduced in each phase, and Miss Lewis is going to explain some of those in our next slide.
So you might have heard us mention tricky words. We quite often have, as part of our phonics sessions with the children that you may have heard when we're teaching online, we quite often have a little standalone session where we remind ourselves of some tricky words. Sometimes they're called sight words, sometimes they're called common exception words. At school, we tend to call them tricky words. Okay, but if you're Googling or trying to find out about them, sometimes they're called sight words or common exception words. Now, these are words that are not yet decodable for the children, so they can't yet sound them out. For example, the word like is a tricky word when the children are in phase 3 and phase 4, okay, in reception. Like is a tricky word because they haven't yet learned the digraph I split E, okay? So like, when they get to phase 5, they'll learn that split digraph, and like no longer is a tricky word. But early on, we know that the word like is quite often used by the children. I like to play. I like going to school. So it's important that they can read those words and use them, even though they don't yet have the phonetic skills to be able to decode them. So some examples of tricky words that we might teach at phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. These are all tricky words that children should learn to know and recognize throughout reception, okay? All of these words the children need to be fairly confident in by the time they come to us in year 1. In year 1, we start to look at words that are perhaps more complex. For example, people. And we start to look at fun ways that the children can start to remember how to spell them and write them, which I know as they move up towards year 3 and to Mr. K, They do a lot more of trying to find fun ways of remembering spellings and practicing spellings. So for example, all my year ones know that we spell people with people eat omelets, people like eggs, because it's just really tricky when you're 5 and 6 to remember how to spell it. So we choose some fun ways to do that. But we really need the children to be confident with phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 by the time they come to these more difficult words.
So when we were in school, teachers plan lessons based on the lesson sound schemes. And this shows you, this diagram just explains how we structure our lessons. Phonics lessons, they're taught daily throughout the week. And each session will follow a structured format. They usually last 15, 20 minutes. It depends on the lesson. The activities used to teach will provide a variety of different skills that they'll be using. They'll be multisensory, so for example, visual and auditory, as well as kinesthetic touching, concrete objects. They involve games, they involve individual, they involve group activities, as well as teacher-led sessions. Teachers try to change them up and perform them in different ways. Throughout these sessions, teachers continually will be assessing the children's understanding of the sounds, the phonemes, the graphemes being taught, and they'll assess their knowledge and whether the child is ready to move on to the next phase. But you can see the diagram here just shows the structure of a lesson. The key to phonics is repetition. The key is that the children need to keep revisiting and reviewing the previous sounds being taught, as well as those tricky words, and coming back to them constantly. And that enables them to have so much more success as they move up through the phases to phases 4, 5, and 6. Over to you, Ms. Lewis.
So some of the strategies that you may have seen us doing online. One of the most important strategies that we teach the children is sound buttons. Now, if I can, I'm just going to see if I can annotate here to show you what I mean by sound buttons. So if we have the word cat, we put a button under each sound like this. And we say to the children, these are 3 sounds and they have 3 sound buttons. Sometimes we might give the children the sound buttons whenever they're trying to spell a word, so that they're practicing using them and working out how many sounds there might be in something. Now, if we've got a digraph, we would put a line under the sound. So for example, if we've got, let me see, sound, we would do this, ow, because we have a digraph in the middle. So a line goes under the digraph. If we have a split digraph, the sound button looks like this, A, because the A and the E work together to make an A sound. Okay, so we would have one sound button for k, then we have A joined together and another k at the end. Hope that makes sense to everybody, because I know sometimes sound buttons can be a little confusing. The children are brilliant at it, but I know that if you haven't been using them, it can be tricky, but it's very helpful. And I don't have a problem with this at all. Maybe Leslie will tell me off for this, but sometimes when my children are reading their school reading books, sometimes it can be really helpful if they come to a word that they're a little bit stuck on, but I know that they could decode using phonics, to use a pencil very gently in their reading book to put the sound buttons underneath. Hope that's all right, Leslie. We also use finger phonics. Now, finger phonics we use a lot whenever we're asking children to segment. So counting the sounds. They're literally just counting the sounds on their fingers, like we did earlier. And we ask them to count the sounds before they write them down. Phoneme frames are very simple. They are little boxes. They do the job of the sound buttons. So, k, a, t, or so if you have a digraph, then it fits into one box. Okay, so our phoneme frames are essentially little boxes. Segmenting and chopping, where we use our robot arms. Quite often in our class, I'll get the children to sound out words by putting their hands together like this, and then we chop up the sound, and then we blend it together with a clap. The children really enjoy it. It's a really physical way of reinforcing the sounds that they're making and then blending them together. Blending and segmenting can sometimes be tricky to understand. Don't worry about it too much in terms of getting it right, which way round it goes. Blending is when we put the sounds in a word in order to read it. So if the child sees the word frog written down, we would sound it out by saying frog, and the children blend it together. You might even see your child doing this with their head as they do it. Quite often we really get them to be physical whenever they're blending initially. So if you see them sounding out a word and then blending it together and moving sideways, that's why. Segmenting is just the other way around. It's when we're asking the children to break it up into its parts in order to spell it. So if I say to the children, can you write frog for me? I expect them to be able to go frog, frog, and they sound it out so that they know that there are 4 sounds and they write down those 4 sounds. Hope that makes sense to everyone. So I don't think we'll do our sound buttons activity just at the moment, but perhaps you can see here how sound buttons could work potentially. We go sh, o, d, s, nt. Okay, so quite often we'll ask the children to add sound buttons as they go. Now, I know it can be sometimes a little bit overwhelming whenever you're trying to support your children at home. We have got some brilliant websites that we can recommend to you. The first one that we'd like to share with you is Phonics Play. We have a school login for this, and it is for everyone to use. So all of the children, certainly in year 1, know that it is Harrow 13, Harrow 13. Phonics Play is a fantastic resource because it is there for all of us to use, for the children, for you, and for ourselves as well. We use it lots in school. We play lots of the games and the children are really familiar with them. You'll find that when you log in and you click on Parents, that you will come up with some menus, ways that you can help your child and information about phonics. If you go into the activities, you'll see that there are lots and lots of games, which the children absolutely adore. They're very interactive. There's lots of sounds and actions and lots of practice, which is the most important thing. You've got games and activities for every phase. Okay.
I want to show you a couple of websites that I've recommended to parents before. So, for example, Teacher Wants You to Read. It's a really wonderful activity for children to complete online. It's basically a game that you need to sign up your child to, but it's free. You don't need to pay for it. You just need to create an account for your child. And it's basically like a computer game with levels, but throughout it, the children are completing activities that involve being able to read and apply their phonics knowledge. But I've used this many times in schools that I've worked in for children that either need to just practice and consolidate the sounds that they've looked at before, but I found many children have enjoyed this game very much. Another website that I've used before for parents is Galactic Phonics. This one is really great. This one, there are 2 parts to it. There's one part that you pay for, but there's another part that's free. And I always recommend the free section. And Galactic Phonics is great for parents if you want to help your child to practice more at home. So, for example, this is a worksheet that is on Galactic Phonics for the long A sound. So if you knew that your child was practicing A in school, you could print this sheet for free and just practice at home a little bit more. But it's got lots of different activities that you can do and some online games as well. So it's just another one that I would recommend as well. So moving on to phase 3, this is reception, and it's up to 12 weeks of learning. And during this time, this is when the children will learn the long vowel phonemes. And in children, when they enter phase 3, they will know the first 19 phonemes that were taught in phase 2. And they learn to blend and segment and read and spell CVC words. And the children are now introduced to trigraphs. So this is where 3 letters makes 1 sound, such as IGH making the long I sound, ear in fear, air in chair, for example. And they will learn another 26 phonemes in this phase. I'm not going to read out all the phonemes, but you can see them written here. They're building on their knowledge from phase 2. And throughout this phase, they learn to read and spell longer words, but they still practice those CVC words as well. So you can see the selection of the words that they learn linked to the sounds that they're learning as well. Thank you. And in phase 4, this lasts throughout reception for approximately 4 to 6 weeks. This is where I mentioned earlier, they learn about consonant clusters. So they read and spell words with 4 or more phonemes. And in order to read these, they need to be confident at blending, as we mentioned earlier, and recognizing those consonant clusters. Children move into phase 4. They should know all of the phonemes from phase 2 and 3. And phase 4 doesn't introduce new phonemes. Instead, it focuses on the reading and spelling skills of longer words with the phonemes that they already know from phase 2 and 3. So these words have consonant clusters at the beginning, for example, in spot, in trip, in clap, in green, in clown. They might also have consonant clusters at the end of words, or they might also appear at the beginning and the end of words, such as trust, spend, and twist as well. So in phase 4, it's not introducing new sounds, but consolidating and practicing the skills that they've already learned in phases 1, 2, and 3.
So phase 5 is the phase that really takes the longest in terms of the children's academic journey. It's the whole of year 1, okay? And we take our time, we do lots and lots of practicing, lots and lots of going back over things and revising, and we also teach some new graphemes for reading. Sounds like a, ow, I, e, oi, oo, o, you, o. Now this one is really tricky. The children always find this one hard, and it's O for August. The children are also introduced to the split digraph, okay? And that is something that they actually really, really enjoy. They love looping under their sound buttons, but they are tricky, and they're tricky for the children to recognize as well. So the split digraph is still the 2 letters that make 1 sound, but these 2 letters are separated by another one. So for example, cake, even, bite, rose, cube. Okay, we don't pronounce the E as an E on the end or as any other sound. It's all together, A. Sometimes we use little remembrances like E on the end makes the vowel say its name. And so when you put an E there, it stops saying and it says A, or it stops saying it and it says I. So sometimes we use little things like that. But of course, because it's English, these rules are not always hard and fast. We also learn some alternative pronunciations of graphemes. So the same grapheme, the same way it's been written, can represent more than 1 sound. So for example, the letter I in thin and in find can make an I or it can make an I. In hot and in cold, it makes an O or an O. Cat and scent, got and giant, which is what we were doing today. And these are tricky because we just have to learn a best fit for children. And what we do is we teach the 2 different ways of pronouncing them, and we get the children to try them out. So they say them out loud. Does it work if I say k-o? Does it k-o? And we try and put it in context as well. So o, lo, that works, but k-o, that doesn't quite work. So how else could I pronounce that O-W? Well, I could pronounce it with an ow, so it becomes k-ow. And when we say it out loud, the children say, oh, cow. So it's really, really important that they're reading out loud. At this stage, yes, it's lovely when your child, snuggles off with a book and say, oh, I've done my reading for school. But it's so, so important that they are reading out loud to you and that you are helping them with these strategies. So we really, really appreciate lots and lots of home practice as well as the amount of practice that we're doing in school. Now, in addition, children, because this is quite long, the children will then move into year 2 and phase 6. I'm going to let Mark explain phase 6 to you.
So phase 6 is the final phase of phonics, the phonics program. It's taught throughout year 2, but also we touch on phase 6 as we progress up into year 3, 4, 5, and 6 as well. We still take elements of it. During this time, this is when we encourage the children, they become more confident and fluent readers and accurate spellers as well. They learn those spelling patterns that I mentioned earlier. So for example, looking at prefixes and suffixes at the beginning and at the end of words. So looking at those groups of letters. At this stage, the children, they can read hundreds of words automatically, and they're now ready for reading for pleasure. And we want to encourage them to love reading and learning to, in that case. And they also learn to decode words quickly, silently, and only need to sound out longer, more unfamiliar words. I still see children in my class in year 3. They're still using, I can see sound buttons, phoning fingers being used to help them with those longer words when spelling and reading. But by this stage, you start to see them move away from using that phonics and now moving into their more comprehensive reading skills.
So just to summarize, the things that you can do to support at home. Please encourage those really vital listening skills. Read, read, read as much as you can. Let your children see you reading as well as them reading. Take turns when you're reading and allow them to follow as you sound out words. Look for familiar sounds in the world around you, point them out, listen to them, talk about how funny they are, and practice and repeat any sounds that you know that your child finds tricky, or that you find tricky, or that you know from what we've heard today that they are difficult. Practice segmenting and blending sounds if you can at home as much as possible. Orally, if you're not feeling confident with it written down, practice just sounding it out as you say it and play some of those games. Look at some of the websites. We'll be sending a copy of this PowerPoint to you. So have a look at those websites, not just Phonics and Play, Letters and Sounds, but Teach Your Monster to Read and Galactic Phonics, and other websites that you might source. Feel free to share those with us as well. What I would say is if you're looking for phonics support online, try and focus on UK synthetic phonics. Mainly because sometimes phonics in America is taught quite differently, and they have different sort of language around the sounds that they're using. And also some EAL phonics can actually be slightly more complex. So look for UK phonics if possible. If you're concerned about how to pronounce the sounds, do ask us. We're always happy to help. And sometimes we have discussions at school between ourselves as staff about how we pronounce things. There are lots of different accents, as you're aware, in England, in Northern Ireland, where I'm from, and Leslie, and Scotland. And within our teams, we have different ways of pronouncing words. If you're not confident or you're not sure, please just ask us. We quite often have debates between ourselves about how we say things. So it's absolutely fine to ask. If you'd prefer to look online, I really recommend Mr. Thorne on YouTube and on his website, and Oxford Owl, where you'll find that same little girl that we saw today, and also some adults demonstrating some really clear pronunciation.
Okay, thank you both, Lucy and Mark, and thank you to parents for listening so well. And we are here for any questions. I know we have been on now for an hour, so you're very welcome to go if you don't have any questions. But if you do, you can either ask them to us now, or you're very welcome to email me. As I said, we'll give you the slides afterwards. But you can email me if you would like to ask any questions about anything that we presented to you today. But thank you so much for coming along. It was definitely very informative. So I hope you've learned a little bit more about phonics and what we do here at Harrow. So thank you so much for coming. And we'll see you in school tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Kieran. Bye, F1. Bye. Bye, Ethan. I'll see you tomorrow. And Nate, too. See you tomorrow. Bye, Ethan.
I just removed